Welcome to the Mulligan Stew podcast. This is episode number 189, and I'll give you two words. Rick Mercer. If you're a Canadian of any stripe, and you mention Rick Mercer, what comes to mind are, for certain generations, This Hour Has 22 Minutes, Made in Canada, Talking to Americans, The Rick Mercer Report for 15 seasons. Rick was appointed an officer of the Order of Canada. He was so honored for his ability to inspire and challenge Canadians through humor. In 2019, he received a Governor General's Performing Arts Lifetime Artistic Achievement Award. What did he do during the pandemic? Well, he sat down and he wrote a memoir called Talking to Canadians. And yes, it did arrive just in time for Christmas. And so did Rick. We had a long conversation. There's a video version of this audio report, and you can find that on our YouTube channel, the Mulligan Stew Podcast. Rick Mercer will be traveling across Canada in the spring. You remember the spring, with the Just for Laughs tour. We'll talk about that just towards the end of this conversation, almost an hour long. Please let me indulge myself here. As long as we might have known about each other or cross paths, this is the first opportunity I've had to interview Rick Mercer. We have a lot to talk about. And welcome to 2022. I'm Terry David Mulligan, and this is the Mulligan Stew Podcast. Happy New Year.
Okay, we're good to go.
Can I ask you right off the top about this memoir and the photo,
Yes.
which is dated, it's from another time, another place.
Yeah.
Do you remember what you were going after on this look? What were you being told from behind the camera? What were you thinking?
I know exactly when the photo was taken. I can remember it. It was the publicity photo from my first one-man show.
Okay.
So I guess I was a legitimate angry young man.
Yes.
And maybe that's what I was going for.
Yes. I love that.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that. Time was stopped. And you did touch on something, Rick. By the way, he is Rick Mercer. That is his book. It's his memoir, Talking to Canadians. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about Canadians to a Canadian, from a Canadian, from coast to coast, from sea to shining sea to sea, waving fields of wheat and beavers. We have been on opposite sides of the country our entire lives. I think I was ever in the same room with you once, maybe twice. It was an airport, out on the prairies, maybe Winnipeg or whatever. And I think Dave Russell was with you. I think John was with you. I think you were either coming from a shoot or heading for a shoot, and it was early in the morning and it was tough to communicate. But
yeah,
that was about it. So this is you and I meeting.
I know, but of course it makes sense that people like you and I would have crossed paths in an airport. Yes. Because I felt like airports were my second residence for so long.
When someone says to me, I met you at an awards show, I go, I'm sorry, I no, that's not really meeting. No. First off the top here, it's not your face I'm really interested in, it's your hands. You claim to have the hands of an Egyptian princess. Can I see them?
There they are. Yes, they've been well worn by typing and holding the microphone.
Did it set out to be an autobiography, or was it always a memoir?
I think it was always a memoir, and I don't know if I knew the difference between the two.
Yeah,
I think a memoir is more interesting because you don't have to tell everything that happened. Whereas I guess with an autobiography, you have an obligation to fill in more blanks. Whereas I just wanted to tell stories that I thought were fun and enjoyable. I didn't have any sort of agenda. I need to explain to people why I'm this way, or I need to talk about this thing that happened in my life because it did. I could pick and choose. I could cherry pick.
Although all the boffo stuff is at the, towards the back of the book.
Yeah.
The early childhood always fascinates me because we never get to see that. You lived it, your friends saw it, but everybody else only sees the finished product, right? You took the Canadian Fitness Award program and they flexed arm hang, things that only a certain segment of the society would know. They're two separate events, but they're both life-changing for someone with princess hands. Were you a meek and mild child, is what I'm saying?
I don't know if I was a meek and mild child. I just failed at the flexed arm hang desperately. And of course, the flexed arm hang was part of the Canada Fitness test. Did they have that when you were in school?
Sure they did, because Mr. Trudeau,
okay.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. But I did find out that the flexed arm hang was actually invented by the Marines.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why the Marines liked it was a test of upper body strength. But certain people with certain types of bodies, no matter how fit they were, they just couldn't succeed at the flexed arm hang. And the Marines love this because part of the philosophy behind Marines is they tear you down and destroy you as an individual and then build you up as a Marine. And this is why the flexed arm hang was perfect, because it just destroyed so many people.
Yes.
And for some reason, the Trudeau government thought that sounds like something we should make every elementary school student do in public.
That's when I discovered that my instructors, when I was training to be a Mountie, did exactly what the Marines taught them to do. And they were ex-Marines.
Right.
That was to build you down and then crush your soul, your very being, and build you up, shape you into the Mountie that they were going to spit out into the world.
I didn't know you were going to be a Mountie.
Yeah.
Were you a Mountie?
I was a Mountie.
Did you make it to that?
I did it. I served for 5 years.
Depot?
Yeah.
So you went to Depot and you did that thing where you have to earn your clothes and you have to earn the right to walk on the sidewalk.
And if you can't swim, like the guy from Nova Scotia who had been a fisherman for his boyhood, they throw you into the deep end of the pool. And they will give you a pole to pull yourself out if you want, but that's how they do it.
Right. Where they could just give you a swimming lesson.
Yes. Yes.
I did not know that part of the Terry David Mulligan lore, that you were a Mountie and served for 5 years.
Here's another thing that we have in common. We have quite a few, actually. You and I were both PA PA announcers. You did the same thing. So how did you find your voice? If I could guess, it's either the Uncle Val show, it's the high school council speech, the Dave Barry thing, it's signing up for stage, or your one-man show. Where did you finally go, all right, this is my voice?
I think the one-man show was when I really found my voice, although I had been performing for a number of years before that.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the Dave Barry speech, and it's good that you call it the Dave Barry speech, because I ran for student council because they had a thing called a speak-off.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I'll be funny. But I didn't really know how to write anything funny. And I remembered these columns that my aunt used to send us when we were kids. And I think they were by Dave Barry. They were just humor columns that were cut out of a newspaper. I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure they were Dave Barry. And one of them was filled with puns on food. And so I basically gently plagiarized that from memory and killed. I got huge laughs. And that's a dangerous thing, of course, for someone who's a budding performer. And I decided that I wanted to do comedy basically after that.
Did you like the applause? Did you like the laughter?
Yeah, although I was never one of those performers that needs that. There's a lot of, especially comedians, who the only time they feel complete is when they're on stage getting laughs. And that's a terrible thing, I would think. And I know there were performers during the pandemic who really lost it because they didn't have the ability to do that, whereas I was fine. I've never needed it to feel sane, but I've certainly enjoyed it.
Could you have existed just as a writer, or did you have to speak those words as well?
The dream was to exist as a writer.
Yeah.
And I always thought that that would be the fallback, because I felt confident enough as a writer that even though I wasn't a journalist or didn't have any of those backgrounds, I thought if I can't make it as an actor or a performer, I can write magazine articles or I can interview people or do whatever. I thought that I could figure out some way to make a living as a writer.
So you had your voice. You knew what you wanted to do, although you couldn't have possibly known where you were headed.
No, not even close.
I love about the hall. Normally you get the author to read, but I just love this. Talking about the first hall you played in.
Mm-hmm.
Compared to those row houses, the hall is an imposing structure, but as far as theaters go, it's fairly impractical. But impractical is hardly uncommon. Newfoundland itself is impractical. The very definition of impractical is a group of actors, writers, dancers, musicians deciding that they will build a professional arts community on a rock in the middle of the North Atlantic.
Yeah.
Was it because you didn't see those limitations?
Well, in those days, I didn't see any limitations, but also the dream was we were going to be professional actors and my friends who were going to be musicians, but we were never going to the mainland. The hell with the mainland. We were going to create work for Newfoundland, about Newfoundland, by Newfoundlanders. That was what we were going to do. Eventually, I decided that that's not what I wanted to do. Lots of people have done that, but that wasn't what I wanted to do. And I had that opportunity to do that first one-man show. And oddly enough, the opportunity was to do it in Ottawa.
Yeah.
And so I left right away. Like there I was going, I will never go there. And then someone said, do you want to go to Ottawa and do a show? Yes, I do. And I kind of was shocked when it worked, because you have that inferiority complex that, yes, I'm making it work here in St. John's, but in the back of your mind, you're thinking, oh, I could never do this in the big city of Ottawa or the big city of Toronto. And that show brought me to all those places. So it was a huge confidence boost.
Rick, when you analyzed, as you would, after you had gotten those laughs and the room was rocking and you had time to really think about it, did you, how long did it take you to figure out what worked? Or was it instantaneous? And secondly, what it was we wanted from you? What really resonated?
I figured out what worked, or how to make something work, early in my career, because there were a number of failures, as you know, if you read the book. Yeah. And you learn more from the failures than from the successes. There's no doubt about it. But with the first one-man show, I found my voice, and I was also lucky that it was the beginning of the creative relationship with Gerald Lunds, who is also my partner in life. We've been together for well over 30 years. But in him, I found a great editor and someone who understood my voice, and someone who taught me that brevity is my friend, which I didn't get until that moment. You know, I was responsible for writing a 3.5 hour long play called We Have No Pity for the Pseudo Downtrodden. And I was convinced on opening night that every single word was important. There was no way I could cut even a single line. Of course, the audience was furious. The show was so long. So I learned a lot early on. And by the time I was in my 20s, I kind of had it figured out.
You take me back to an extremely rainy LA night, under the roofline of the Chateau Marmont in LA.
Right.
It's pouring, classic California rain, thunder just coming off the roof. And I'm doing an interview with Katie Lang, in which when I finish, although she doesn't tell me specifically that she's coming out, she comes out momentarily. And it was very public in the manner in which she did it. Your coming out wasn't public, but as you say in the book, your friends knew, people knew around you. Was there any, what was your life like at that moment, in that time? Was it an easy transition for you?
Yeah. The coming out, like I always considered that I was out for my entire professional career, because everyone I worked with knew, my family knew I was gay, everyone knew I was gay. But I never talked about it in the media. And actually, just a couple of nights ago, I was interviewed by Lyndon McIntyre, ex of the Fifth Estate. Yeah. And he reminded me, well, I remembered that the Fifth Estate early in my career had done a profile on me when I was like 3 years into 22 minutes.
Sure.
And I remember that fondly. But in the interview, Lyndon said to me, do you remember the first time we spoke? And I was embarrassed that I didn't. I said, but I kind of pretended. I went, yes. And he said, I called you from a payphone. Yeah. And I told you that the Fifth Estate were doing these celebrity profiles. They'd never done them before. And Lyndon had chosen me. And we're going to do a profile on you. And do you remember what you said, Rick? And I said, no, I don't. And he said, you said no. I said, what? He said, you said no. And he said, I started asking questions. I think you were very worried about your personal life. And I think I was, and I'm embarrassed to admit that now, that at the time I thought, well, I had decided I would never deny being gay if anyone ever asked me about it, but no one ever did. But I thought, if the Fifth Estate is coming to do a profile, well, they're the Fifth Estate, for God's sake, it's going to come out. So I said no, but then Lyndon, I guess, indicated to me that he figured that was my concern, and he indicated he didn't care about my personal life, so I did it. But it was interesting to have that conversation with Lyndon, because I don't really remember what it was like being that nervous that people might know that about me. And soon after, that changed, and I referenced it many times in the media and stuff. And every time I did, people would say, "Oh, I didn't know you were gay," and then I would say, "My God, how many times do you have to come out in this country?" But uh, but I guess by the time I was doing it, the days of Katie Lang coming out when it was a huge news story were over.
Yeah,
people just kind of. But when I came out, people just met it. It was kind of a collective shrug, which is ideal. That's progress.
I love your Charles Lynch references. I love I actually love the love between the two of you, because he could have been just a miserable toad. He could,
Sure.
It could have been just fighting tooth and nail. But the fact that you came together, you said things about him that he could have taken the wrong way, and he embraced you. You worked together as a pair. It's almost impossible to define. You rarely see that. And I love the fact that you included it in his primary in your memoir, simply because it worked so well. It led to so many other things.
Sure. And I got a lesson from a master in being a shit disturber and being and using the media to your advantage the way Charles was doing it. It was a great friendship. And I was so young when I wrote that first play, and it was subtitled Charles Lynch Must Die.
Yes.
And I find that appalling, because today, if someone said they wrote a play and it was subtitled Anyone Must Die, David Suzuki Must Die, Anyone Must Die, I would think that is in terrible taste. You shouldn't do that. Like, it took a young man to do that. I would never do that today. The fact that he took it and actually ended up celebrating me and celebrating the show was phenomenal. And I don't know, if I woke up tomorrow and I picked up the paper and I saw that some scallywag was doing a show called Rick Mercer Must Die, I don't know how I would respond.
Yes.
I would be like, hey, I'd be like, what did I do to you? And I would think, I think I would take it as a threat, which I don't think you're supposed to do. Yeah, it's very odd. But Charles was a champion. And of course, he did get the last laugh, and he did send me the bulletin from his funeral, which from Beyond the Grave, which was a classy act.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So you're off to Halifax to begin your TV career with This Hour. Kathy and Mary and Greg. Your stage character was J.B. Dickinson, named after J.D. Roberts, who has had a There's a book I want to read.
I would like to read his book too. Yeah.
I mean, he went from the Power Hour to front seat, row one in the White House during the Trump era.
Yeah.
My God. I can't pass over This Hour without just asking a question about, because I've been there. When you work so closely with people, Kathy and Mary and Greg, when you're doing comedy and it's intense, and you each have your own take on what's funny and what works and the highs and lows of it, how difficult is it to remain friends?
We pulled it off. There was a lot of creative differences in the early days,
Totally.
But that was because we were creating a show.
Sure.
So everyone had a different idea,
Yeah.
and then a lot of our ideas then we throw out the next day. But we were friends. I mean, Kathy and Mary had a lot of baggage because they were in Codco together. I had never worked with Greg. I knew Kathy and Mary, but I never worked with them. But we did. But the thing that people didn't realize, even students of 22 Minutes didn't realize, is that we were very much 4 satellites doing the show.
Yeah.
In fact, there was only ever one recurring segment where we all appeared together. That was an interview called the Quinlan Quints, and all 4 of us would play these brothers, and I would interview the 4 of us. And then we cut it together.
Yeah.
But that was the only time all 4 of us appeared in a sketch together, almost ever. And no one ever really noticed that. There was so much of it was Marg Princess Warrior, Marg Delahunt. He always appeared alone. My rants, I was always alone. Jerry Boyle was always alone. Kathy's characters, for the most part, were alone. And then we do these little interviews. So I think that had a lot to do with why we remained friends. We weren't sitting down writing sketches together.
But I mean, everybody, as you well know, people all have different sense of laughter, what they find funny. I'm an absurdist. I want absurdist. I want Python. I want.
Sure. So you love Greg. You love Greg Toomey, I bet.
Of course.
Because Greg Toomey was the absurdist in our gang.
He's still walking around with a hat on, a detective hat.
He's he would be the guy who would to me was just a complete absurdist. I remember he did a sketch and it didn't get in, and it had a spangly curtain. Like there was a spangly curtain in the back, and then like his life was a performance art. And then the next sketch he was pitching, and we were going to do it. The art director said, "What do you see as a set, Greg?" And he's like, "My lucky curtain." And then he did another sketch, and it didn't get in because in part it didn't make sense that there was this spangly curtain. And then the next week, what do you see the set as, Greg? My lucky curtain. I was like, Greg, that curtain's not lucky. Take that curtain and burn it. But he's very much an absurdist. I quote Greg in the book because I remember when he said it, and I said, "That's a great title for your memoir." And he hasn't written that yet, but he said one night, "Heavy is the head that wears the lampshade."
Yes.
I love it. Yeah. A great Toomey line.
I love that line. I wrote it down. The whole Kim Campbell, Jean Chrétien live coverage. Chrétien, I couldn't wait to read your meeting with Chrétien because I only had one. And it was during one of the elections, and I'm doing Much Music to Much West. And I suggest to his people that we're going to play pool.
Right.
Because the pool hall was next door to where he was going. I went, I'll make it as easy as possible. And so we played pool, surrounded by the press and by his people. And they 5 minutes into it, they were trying to move him out the door. He wouldn't leave that room until he had beaten my ass, till he put every ball in every pocket.
Yeah, and I know. But you had to have known what you were getting into, because I don't know how much pool you played. But, of course, if you read biographies of Chrétien, that's where he came of age, was in pool halls. So you're getting into trouble. I heard a story the other day that when Chrétien was campaigning in Cape Breton, someone told me he went in and he was talking to their aunt, and she was quite taken with him. And he'd had 2 cups of tea, and it was the same thing. There was a guy outside knocking on the door going, "Come on, Mr. Chrétien, come on." And then her husband came home. So he decided to have another cup of tea, and he said, "I hear you're a miner." And he said, "Yeah." And he said, "That's hard work." And the guy said, "Oh yeah, you got to use your muscles." And Chrétien said, "Oh, you're strong, are you?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm pretty strong." And then Chrétien rolled up the shirt, put his arm on the table. And the guy looked at him, and he rolled up the shirt, and the wife was going, "Oh my God, oh my God." And they had an arm wrestle. And the uncle, my friend's uncle, said, "And boy, it was a bit of a job to put his arm to the table, let me tell you, for a politician." So he held his own against a miner. But what kind of politician would be talking to a hard rock miner and then roll up the sleeve and put the arm on? I mean, you could be killed.
No,
so
he was a very complex individual, but I found him fascinating. Much like yourself. This book, friends, we're not done yet, but this book, Rick Mercer, Talking to Canadians, just in time for Christmas, is a memoir. It's out there, and I want clarity. I'm too busy during the day. I want clarity.
Right.
So you have kept me up, and I want to get rid of the book so I can go to sleep now.
Well, you pass it on. Pass it on.
Talking to Americans.
Yeah.
You couldn't have hoped for anything to turn out as well as it did.
No.
And really, some of the best things that ever happened in our lives happen. They're just in front of us, and there it is. Go get it.
Yeah.
If you find it funny, maybe they'll find it funny. But it's man, it was streeter gold.
And it was, well, and you know yourself because you're in the business. There's nothing worse than doing streeters.
Yeah.
Streeters they're exhausting, and they're just hard to make entertaining.
Yeah.
And even if people have something to say, it's just hard to make interviews with people on the street work. And so we had given it up, and it was just a total fluke. It was a complete and utter fluke. We were in Washington, D.C. I was shooting something else, and a guy came along, and he looked at the box that the camera came in, and it said Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And he said, "Oh, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, eh?" And I said, "Yep." And then there was like 40 seconds of silence. And then he looked at me and went, "Canada." And I said, "Yes, Canada." And he was very excited that I was from Canada. And then I just made up a story. He asked me why I was there. I won't tell the whole story here, but I made up a story, and he went along with it. I thought, wow, this guy's gullible. And he ended up explaining to me how alphabetical order worked.
Yeah.
And then I went around and got other people to do the same thing. We came home, we put it on TV, and it just was like launching a rocket. People loved it so much. And it was wild because you could, that happens so often.
The possibilities,
Yeah.
right?
Oh yeah. And then suddenly I had this thing that everyone wanted. And I wouldn't equate anything I've ever done to great SCTV, but they say, I don't know if it's true, but I've certainly read it, that when they did Bob and Doug McKenzie the first time,
Yeah.
they were just filling time, and they just basically did an improv, and they were making fun of Canadian content rules.
Sure.
And that the week that episode aired, no one involved in the show knew that Bob and Doug McKenzie were going to become Bob and Doug McKenzie, and there would be a #1 record, and they would be recording with Rush, and they would have movies, and every kid in my junior high would be Bob and Doug McKenzie on dress up day.
And their pictures and their photos would be on throw cushions.
Yeah, and that was kind of what it was like. Suddenly I was on a hit show, and then suddenly there was this segment inside the show that people couldn't get enough of. It was wild. It was a lot of fun.
You describe yourself as a chronic daydreamer. Did you dream of a future, of a world that didn't exist, or did you see what was up ahead of you?
Memory is a funny thing.
Yeah.
Some things you remember, some things you don't. And I don't remember anything about grade 4. Like I look at the class photo and I remember the kids because they were also in grade 3, but I don't really remember that classroom. But grade 3, I remember so much. And recently, a video surfaced of me that I really didn't remember. And now I remember, but I've seen the video. And it was when I was in grade 10 or 11. We were near the CBC studios, our school, and we were just a couple of classes. We just marched down to the CBC studios one day with no warning because they needed a studio audience of young people. And they had this panel of experts on the future of youth in Newfoundland, none of whom were young, of course.
Yes.
And we were watching. And this guy who was a big CBC journalist, and I like I say, I wouldn't remember this. He said, young people are just going to have to realize that they can't just do what they want. If we need plumbers, be a plumber. And if we need electricians, be an electrician. But stop thinking, where do you get this idea that you can do what you want in life? And I stood up and I went after him. And I said, it was when Sally Ride was the female astronaut. Sure. And I said, what would happen if Sally Ride listened to someone like you? I don't know where I got the smarts to pick a female astronaut as an example. I said, what would happen if Sally Ride listened to you? She wouldn't have gone to space and inspired all those young girls. And then I said, and I live here in Newfoundland, and I'm going to be an actor, and I'm going to be the best actor there is, and I'm going to have a career in television. And then I sat down, the guy went, well, good luck with that. And it's a great little clip of a saucy young man, but I didn't remember it. But I guess I clearly had a pretty strong idea of what it was I wanted to do, even though I don't really remember it. There is video evidence.
I don't mean to be trading riffs with you, but I did this whole exercise when I did a book. And I tried to remember my life and I couldn't remember it. That was the problem. And pictures set me off. Not so much videos, but photos. I see this photo of me adjusting a microphone on stage. Can't see who I'm adjusting. It's just a black and white. And I'm setting up a microphone and smiling at them saying, does that work for you? And then I followed it back and realized that I had been the MC of the first Greenpeace concert fundraiser in Vancouver with Joni Mitchell and James Taylor and Phil Oakes and Chilliwack. How could I possibly forget the night?
Yeah.
So I realized that this is an exercise. There are things that you're going to look at and go, I wasn't there. Yeah,
sure.
This is you. So
sure. And the Lyndon McIntyre.
And that's why maybe there's a volume 2.
Well, maybe. And it's amazing. The Lyndon McIntyre moment when he said, you said no, it just came back to me. Like I totally blocked that out. And I told him after, had I bumped into him on the street while I was writing this book and he had mentioned that, I would have included it. I think I would have, because it did illustrate that I wasn't entirely comfortable with my life becoming public. And that was a real shock to me. I don't remember feeling that way, that I would turn down. Also, from a pure mercenary point of view, a young man trying to build his career. At the time, the Fifth Estate was getting 1.2 million viewers, and it was a venerable show. To say no must have meant I was afraid of something. So, yeah, it's interesting. And you hosted the first Greenpeace concert with Joni Mitchell and Chilliwack.
They wanted to send a fishing boat to the Amchitka Islands out of Alaska to stop nuclear testing, but they needed the boat, so we raised $40,000 that night. But I'd completely forgotten.
Yeah.
I love the story about Stockwell Day. I love that. I knew that one. I had, but you freshened it up for me. I had forgotten the nuts and bolts. The only thing any of us ever remember is him getting off that frickin' skidoo in Lake Okanagan. You know.
I loved writing about that.
But it did set in motion for you a life on the internet.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And it illustrated to a lot of people the power of the internet, because when I decided to launch this petition, having Canadians sign a petition forcing Stockwell Day to change his name to Doris, the first thing we needed to do when I came up with the idea was, well, I guess we need to get a website, this newfangled website. And the TV show didn't even own the domain name 22minutes.com, or This Hour Has 22minutes.com or .ca. And we were 2 or 3 years in at that point. Can you imagine? Like a hit show, didn't it? Because none of the shows had web pages, because it was very little you could do. The only thing you could do was collect email addresses. You know, why would that be interesting?
Was your name available when you looked?
I do own rickmercer.com, but I bought it a long time ago. I bought it around not long after that. And not long after that, I met someone or I knew someone, and they were they were expecting a son, and when they were coming up with baby names, like say, you know, for their baby, and who's going to be named Terry David Mulligan, they go, no, that's not available. We're not naming him that. Like, he literally named his child something.
No, come on.
So he could get the domain name. He said he might need that someday.
That's dangerous. That's dangerous.
Yeah, I know.
The whole Stockwell Day, it was such a great read to go back and realize that, first of all, it was his policy that set it in motion, because you know 350,000 people could change history in a small way, but they could. And so you called them on it. I love that. I love the balls behind it. Bosnia was a whole nother thing. As you say, there's no crying in comedy, and it led to crying. Bosnia the experience must have changed you in its own way.
It did. And it was the most personally satisfying thing I had ever done. Yeah. And I'd done a lot of fun things up until then, but nothing that was that personally satisfying. And it also, I knew a bunch of people growing up who were in the forces. There's always been a lot of Newfoundlanders in the forces for different reasons. So when I grew up on my street, you know, we had a teacher, we had a guy worked for Light and Power, but there was a couple of guys, who had families on the street, were in the Canadian forces. So I knew people whose parents were in the forces, who would disappear for 6 months. My father's gone away. He's in, Germany or something. I would think that's so weird. But I knew them. But then when I was spending time in the mainland, of course, fewer people know people in the Canadian forces. So it's even further removed. Sure. But it was pretty far removed. When I went to Bosnia, I was so embarrassed. I was thinking of doing something about Canadian peacekeepers. I wasn't even sure where they were. And I called up the guy from the forces who was in charge of taking media, questions. And I said, how we have peacekeepers overseas now? And he was like, yes. And I said, how many? And he told me it was thousands. I was embarrassed. I was like, and they are in, and he said, Bosnia. And I went, right. And of course, there'd been this horrible war in Bosnia. And there I was, Mr. allegedly current affairs expert in all things, consumer of all news. And I wasn't really sure where they were and what they were doing.
They'd been forgotten.
They'd been forgotten, and they were were in harm's way. And they were the only thing stopping two warring factions from going at each other again. And so in that conversation, I said, how do I get to Bosnia exactly? And then literally within days, we were getting on a plane and we went and we did this piece. And the most amazing thing about it was everywhere I went, they were constantly thanking us for coming. And I thought, this is all ass backwards. We should be thanking you. And the piece was lovely, and it generated thousands of emails again and messages using the same website that we had started for the Doris Day campaign. And I certainly saw the power of the internet, and it launched a lifelong support for the Canadian forces, and not mission-based. It was never mission-based. I went to Afghanistan 3 or 4 times. It was never mission-based. It was all about doing shows for soldiers who were in harm's way on our behalf because we told them to go there.
But you know how good that feels. You know how good it's good for the head and the heart. There was a CBS show, and I wonder if you noticed it because I loved it. It wasn't even a show. It was just a feature on their weekends. It was a guy who would stand in front of a map and had a blindfold and would stick a pin in it. Duluth, okay. He would go to Duluth. He'd go to a phone booth. He would open up the book and he'd go, okay. Right. Joe Morgan, okay. He would go and find Joe Morgan and do a story on him. Every one of those stories was fantastic. They all had...
I've never heard of this.
Oh, this is incredible.
I've never heard of it, and I love that idea.
It's astonishing. Every one of them had a story to tell, and you were transfixed at what the story was. The Mercer Report was very much like that CBS show.
Yeah, that's not how we chose the ideas, but the one thing I was proud of the most was we would be going to a recycling factory. Yeah. We knew that. Yeah. And I was confident that I will find people there that I can talk to and we can make them look great. And I think that was my superpower. That was my skill. And I've always enjoyed doing that. I had a conversation on the plane. I hadn't been on a plane in quite a while, but I just flew back from Ottawa just this week, and from Ottawa to Toronto, which is not a long flight. Yeah. I had the most fascinating conversation with this young airline pilot who flies those Red Bull airplanes. Yeah. You know, that insanely dangerous sport. That's his sport. I asked him, I said, what does your wife think about that? He said, she's a wing walker. I was like, my God, she's a wing walker. And then, and I said, what about your old man? He said, well, he's an astronaut. And he was one of Canada's astronauts, one of the first 6 that went up in the space shuttle. And I just thought, I wish it was back in the days when I had a camera. We could do a great story with this guy. And he was just whoever happened to be sitting next to me on the plane.
And then, Mr. Mercer, you moved on to Made in Canada, you and Michael Donovan, and you likened it to a restaurant. If he was the owner, GM, did that make you front of house or chef? Like you were cooking together. How did that work?
He was the owner. We were the chefs, for sure. Yeah. Back then, we had a division of labor. Gerald and I would say, we're in charge of the funny, you're in charge of the money. And Michael was okay with that when it came to Made in Canada, the sitcom. We owe him a great debt of gratitude because the first 6 episodes went $1 million over budget. And so he was on the hook for $1 million. Yeah. And it wasn't hard to go $1 million over budget because it was woefully underfunded to begin with. Sure. That's why it went over. And eventually we got all the money back because we did eventually 64 episodes. But I use the restaurant analogy because TV is very much a producer's medium. And the person who owns the restaurant, at the end of the day, calls the shots. So you can be a chef in the best restaurant in town, but if the owner suddenly gets it in his head, some stupid idea that we're only serving turbot from here on in or whatever, that's it. You don't have any control. So that was, as time went on, I became more and more interested in producing. And that's why the ultimate goal was the Mercer Report, which was our show. Yeah. And we had complete control because we owned it. And that was very important. That said, that desire was never driven by interference or on the part of Michael Donovan, because Michael was a great believer of getting out of the way, I think, certainly with Made in Canada. And his love is in the art of the deal. Yeah. And that's why he's been responsible for so many great television and film projects. I mean, he went on to win an Oscar, for God's sakes.
Everybody, yes, and everybody needs someone in their life, the art of the deal. Everybody needs that person. For me, it's my wife.
Yeah, and I've been very lucky too because my partner was the producer. Yeah, and so he was never in it for 15%. Yeah, you know, he was never, and he was in charge of artist management. He basically managed my career, and again, he was never in it for 15%. He was in it for other reasons, for personal reasons, and that meant I had the best manager in the room because everyone else's manager was just doing it for, for a few bucks.
Here's where we cross paths again.
Yes.
Many years ago, I was asked by World Vision to go to Somalia, and they were in serious trouble there. The people were dying by the hundreds and thousands. Starvation, malnutrition, wars, water, bad water. And they said, who would you like to take with you? You need someone to take with you. And I said, Tom Cochrane. So when you had a chance to do Christmas in Kabul, October 2003, you thought of Tom Cochrane as well for the same reasons? Because, right?
Yeah. And it was a very short conversation. I called him up and I said, Tom, we're going to go to Afghanistan for Christmas. We're going to do a great big old-fashioned music variety show. Yeah. And I didn't get any other words out of my mouth. And he was like, I'm in. Okay, let's go. And that was it. There was no talk of money or musical rights or anything. I mean, that was all done afterwards, but he committed right there on the spot. And he was a great guy to travel with, and great storyteller.
Sure.
And a fantastic guy. And he's just a great guy. And he's got great hits. So the soldiers loved him. That was the thing. I said, if we're going, I need someone with radio hits.
Right.
There's so many great musicians, but I just wanted someone who had radio hits. And of course, he had one of the biggest ever.
And the cool thing is that we went to Somalia and Mozambique and Malawi, and we went twice, actually. And Mozambique shows up in those lyrics. He wrote that song after he came back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. How different was the experience in Kabul as opposed to Bosnia?
Well, it was very different. Bosnia was a peacekeeping mission, and in Afghanistan, we were at war.
Yeah.
And so Afghanistan was more dangerous, although Bosnia was very dangerous because of the number of landmines, these insidious landmines that were small and plastic and just shoved underneath clumps of grass.
Sure.
And then the winter came, the snow came, and then the runoff meant that these things were everywhere. No one knew where they were. Yeah. So they were insidious and they were everywhere. And that was one of the things the Canadians were doing, was removing those things. They were plastic, almost impossible to detect with metal detectors. Brutal work. But Afghanistan was different. There was a sense that obviously the Taliban had missiles pointed at the bases we were in, and alarms would go off. And, there had been one instance we'd been there. There was a fairly serious attack just days before we arrived. One of the first friends I made in Afghanistan, Paul Franklin, lost his legs a couple of years after I met him. And he's still a good friend to this day. But so I never felt in danger. I always felt I was surrounded by all these men and women who would do everything and anything to protect me and Tom Cochrane. Believe it or not, I just thought, I'm safe. But it was a very different situation.
You had a chore to do. You were going to bring Canada back to those men and women.
Sure. And so many of them are so young, even by that point, because when I went to Bosnia, I was a kid. But by the time I went to Afghanistan, I was older than it seemed like most of the people I was interviewing. And that gives you a completely different perspective. And when I went to Bosnia, they were all older guys. But by the time I got to Afghanistan, I looked at them as kids.
And they were ready to laugh, weren't they?
Oh my God, yeah, they're a great audience. I mean, comedians love a captive audience. You go to a war zone, you got one.
Just for laughs.
Yeah.
You're going out on the road. You start on your end of the country, the Maritimes, and you end in Victoria on the Rock here with me in May. So a couple of things. You're going to be in Vancouver May 21, Victoria May 22. You're going to be in Alberta the 19th and 20th, the Jube in Edmonton, the Jube in Calgary. And you're going to cover the country. And you're bringing fresh troops with you. Yeah.
This was what I did when I wrapped up the Mercer report. I wanted to tour the country and do a stand-up show. And I toured the country before and hosted a stand-up show, but I was the MC. I wasn't a pure stand-up. Yeah. And I thought, if I ever do that again, I'm going to go and I'm going to have my 20-minute set in the first act and my 20-minute set in the back in the second act. And I'm going to be just like those other stand-ups. And it was a big learning curve. I had to start doing open mic nights and building a show. And so I loved it. And I just committed to doing it again. And of course, it's been postponed now 4 times because of this pandemic. But now tickets are on sale, and it's really happening.
Did you see the documentary that was done on Seinfeld?
Yeah.
How he beat himself up on what he was writing, and he would change everything. He was listening to the audience, and he was always asking questions about how he was doing and what he changed and things like that. Are you like that, or are you walking out there and those 20 minutes are set?
Well, they change over time.
Yeah.
They certainly do, and they evolve over time. And that's why when I started working with my buddy Greg Eckler, who is a great stand-up comic, he said, "You're going to have to start going to open mics and doing this material." And I was like, "No, I don't really. Do I? We'll just write the material and I'll memorize it, and then I'll go out and do it." He was like, "Nope, doesn't work that way." And so I kind of felt like I was Rocky Balboa and he was the old guy. This is the way you do it, Rocky. This is the way you do it. I said, "Okay, I'm in your hands. We'll go do horrible open mic nights." And they are horrible. He'd take me to some bar and we'd go into the back. There'd be 14 people there. 2 of them had their heads on the table. They were asleep or dead. And a couple of other people aren't paying attention. And they'd say, "Okay, we got you 10 minutes at 11:15. I was like, I want to be asleep by 11:15. I don't want to be in this room. But it made all the difference in the world. He was absolutely right.
Do you want to go back on stage as an actor?
I don't know. That's certainly on the table. The problem with that is, quite frankly, is it's so much work. 8 shows a week, and then in the big time, they could run that show for 6 or 7 or 8 weeks.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have that in me.
How about a one-man show?
I don't know. It's been so long since I've ever thought of the one-man shows. That was a different part of my life. And dude, I always wanted to do TV so much, but now I've kind of got TV out of my system after 26 years. And so who knows, maybe I'll go back there. I've been thinking about the one-man shows more than I had in a very long time because I was writing the book.
I always think of you doing a one-man show. I think it would be fantastic.
Well, this is why I'm doing the Just for Laughs thing. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed that. And those are big rooms and filled with people who love comedy. It's great fun.
All right, fine. I'll let you go.
You make it sound like I'm one of those guys putting my coat on and inching towards the door. Okay, I'll let you go.
No, but I've taken up 59 minutes of your time. No, I have to let you go.
There's still a pandemic going on. What do I have? Nothing. I'm going to walk to Shoppers Drug Mart. That's my afternoon.
Okay. What's planned out for you 2022, if we can actually be normal?
The Just for Laughs tour.
Yeah.
And then I want to write another project. I don't know what that'll be. Really, no idea. No, I've never been good at that.
Yeah.
I tried to do nothing, but when the pandemic happened, I thought, well, I'll do nothing for a while. And I just wasn't very good at it. And I was really lucky that I had this project to do, the book, because I don't know what would have happened if I had nothing.
Did it come out easily? Did it flow? Did you have to pull this from you?
Once it started,
yeah.
it started to come, and I did write it chronologically, and I started to enjoy it. And then there was real reconnection too. I was also really lucky that, talking about memory, I toured with this guy, Jeff Dion. I didn't tour. He was my road director, and he was the producer on the road. Yeah. And so everywhere I went with 22 Minutes, I was with him. And when Gord Downey passed away, Jeff is a great writer. When Gord Downey passed away, he just wrote a little thing on Facebook like so many Canadians did. And he said, I remember on this date, I was on the roof of this hotel in San Francisco lying by the swimming pool, and Rick Mercer was there. We were doing Talking to Americans, and Mercer picked up the newspaper and said, "Oh, the Tragically Hip are playing at Fillmore West, the legendary Fillmore West." I said, "Oh my God, they're playing there tonight." And Jeff said, I've never seen the Hip. And I was like, "Oh my God, how have you seen the Hip?" And I called Jake Gold and got us tickets. And anyway, he wrote this really beautiful tribute to Gord, and I thought it was beautiful. But my other takeaway was, I don't remember being on the roof of that hotel. And I was like, right, I was on the roof of that hotel. And of course I called Jake Gold. And then I said, how does Jeff know that? So I thought he must have been taking notes. And so when I started this book, when I got to the 22-minute stuff, I called him up and I said, I'm writing a book. There's going to be a fair bit about 22 minutes and talking to Americans and all that. He said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "I guess you might write your own book one of these days." And he said, "Yeah, that's why I kept all those notes." Yes. And I said, "Yeah, all those notes." And he said, "But I also thought you might write a book someday, and I might as well write down what we were doing." So we came to an agreement, and he was very helpful. And he was literally the guy I could say, "Remember that time we went to Little Rock, Arkansas?" And he could go flip, 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 flip. And he'd go, "Yeah, it was this day. and we ate at this restaurant, and then suddenly all the memories would come flooding back. So everyone needs a guy like that in their life, an ex-journalist who's on the road with them.
I know. It did not go unnoticed that you one of the things that you found a priority wherever you went was to find a great meal. God bless you. Waited. Well,
yes.
Because, because you got to have that meal. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much for this, and I'll be standing by for volume 2.
Thank you very much.
The book is Rick Mercer Talking to Canadians, a memoir. It's out now. It has that black and white, angry young man look on the front cover, but if you go to the back, there's a nice color shot of the current Rick Mercer. Next week on the Mulligan Stew podcast, oh, he is such a troublemaker. He is Chief Clarence Louis from the Osoyoos Indian Band, and he is stepping on toes and taking names and calling people out, his own people. He has been the chief of the Osoyoos Indian Band for almost 40 years. Chief Clarence Louis has released his first book. It's called Res Rules, My Indictment of Canada's and America's Systematic Racism Against Indigenous People. He has a lot to talk about. He has a lot of people to hold accountable, and he has to talk to the future leadership of all of the Indian nations across this country, and actually America as well. They have to do better. He's going to tell you how to do it. The Osoyoos Indian Band is one of the most successful Indian bands anywhere, and they've been led by Chief Clarence Louis. Next week on the Mulligan Stew podcast.